The countdown to the explosion had already begun. The plan was to bring down the massive century-old chimney of the historic Avondale Mills cotton mill in Alabama. But when the first blast went off, the enormous structure was still standing. The controlled demolition had failed. Even so, the operation continued. An excavator was sent toward the site, and the operator began moving closer as the unstable chimney started to shift. Then, without warning, the structure suddenly snapped sideways. The massive chimney collapsed directly onto the excavator's position. The impact sent nearby crews into panic. Fortunately, the operator escaped unharmed at the very last second. Damaged structures no longer behave predictably. Heavy machinery should never approach unstable buildings without proper analysis. Secondary collapse risks must always be considered. Safe distances must be maintained, and operations should be reassessed immediately. The shift at the facility was continuing as usual. Operators were monitoring the control panels, while pumps and tank systems worked normally. But inside one of the sealed tanks in the treatment area, flammable gas had begun to build up. Within moments, the concentration inside the tank reached a critical level. Suddenly, a violent explosion tore through the facility. The shockwave spread rapidly across the area. Metal panels were ripped away. Nearby equipment suffered severe damage, and the entire operational zone descended into chaos within seconds. Gas detection systems should never be ignored, and ventilation equipment must always be monitored carefully. Massive steel components were being transported across the facility with the help of a crane, while workers moved carefully to keep the load balanced. One worker attempted to guide the suspended load using his hands. The crane moved slowly as the heavy steel pieces swayed through the air. But then, the load suddenly began to lose balance. Within seconds, a large metal piece swung violently and struck the worker with tremendous force. Suspended loads should never be controlled by hand. Workers should avoid standing directly beside heavy crane loads, and physical contact with moving loads must always be avoided. Everything appeared normal in the loading area. A small truck was parked by the curb with its rear ramp lowered. Two workers were carefully trying to unload a heavy refrigerator. The massive appliance was being supported only by human strength. There were no securing straps, and no professional lifting equipment had been used to stabilize the load. As they slowly lowered the refrigerator down the ramp, its center of gravity suddenly shifted. In an instant, the heavy refrigerator toppled onto the worker. Tall and heavy loads can swing like a giant pendulum the moment balance is lost. Human strength alone is not enough to control this kind of weight. Heavy lifting operations should never rely solely on physical force. Work was underway inside a narrow pipeline trench. A welder was preparing to carry out a routine procedure on a large steel pipe. Both ends of the pipeline had been sealed, leaving almost no airflow inside. As the welder ignited the torch, sparks spread across the metal surface. Everything looked normal during the first few seconds, but at that exact moment, flammable gas trapped inside the pipe came into contact with the sparks. Suddenly, a short but powerful explosion echoed through the trench. Before working inside enclosed pipelines, gas buildup must always be checked carefully. External appearance alone should never be trusted. The demolition countdown had begun. A massive concrete tower in Kaohsiung, Taiwan, was about to be brought down in a controlled demolition within seconds. Crews had already taken their positions around the area, and preparations for the blast were complete. When the explosives detonated, the tower trembled slightly at first. Everyone expected it to collapse toward the designated safety zone. But in that moment, the structure unexpectedly began leaning in the opposite direction. The enormous concrete tower rapidly crashed to the ground, damaging nearby power lines as it fell. A huge cloud of dust filled the sky, while people nearby rushed to reach safe areas. Controlled demolitions require precise calculations. The direction of a structure's collapse should never be left to chance. Everything seemed normal as the small aircraft lifted off from the runway. The engine sounded stable, and the plane climbed steadily into the air. But when the pilot noticed a technical malfunction, he was forced to make critical decisions within seconds. As the aircraft began losing speed, the pilot searched desperately for the nearest safe landing area. However, there was no suitable runway nearby. At that moment, he redirected the aircraft toward a nearby highway. Suddenly, the plane began descending rapidly and slammed hard onto the road below. Aircraft maintenance should never be delayed, and technical inspections must always be taken seriously. Emergency scenarios should be planned in advance, and pilots must remain prepared for unexpected failures. Work was continuing normally at the elevated job site. A worker was carefully moving across a metal surface while performing his duties several meters above the ground. He was wearing safety equipment and remained focused on his routine task. But suddenly, his foot slipped on the surface. Losing balance, the worker was instantly pulled toward the edge. For a brief moment, his body dropped rapidly through the air. Then the safety system activated. The lanyard tightened, and the fall arrest equipment stopped him before he could hit the ground. Safety equipment used during work at height saves lives. No one should work without a safety harness, and anchor points must always be checked before climbing. Workers in blue overalls were assembling steel components, while crane systems moved smoothly along the production line. Inside the factory, everything appeared routine. But above them, unseen pressure was building on the roof structure. Outside, powerful winds were battering the metal panels. At first, the vibrations seemed like nothing more than an ordinary storm. The roof swayed slightly, and occasional metallic noises echoed through the building. No one expected what would happen only seconds later. Then, an unusual sound came from above. Suddenly, a massive crashing noise thundered through the factory as sections of the roof system gave way and collapsed. Post-storm vibrations, metallic noises, cracks, or water leaks can all signal a potential collapse risk. Building structures should be inspected regularly, and unusual sounds must never be ignored. Work was continuing in the landslide zone along the roadside. After days of heavy rainfall, crews entered the excavation area to clear away accumulated debris. While one worker was cleaning mud from inside the trench, a construction machine and 2 other workers waited above. The soil had become completely saturated with water. Loose rocks were barely holding on to the slope, and the hillside was slowly losing its stability. Despite the danger, operations continued. Then, small movements began appearing near the top of the slope. Suddenly, the entire hillside collapsed. Massive amounts of mud and rock debris rushed downward, rapidly filling the trench below. Working beneath slopes weakened by heavy rainfall is extremely dangerous. Water-saturated hillsides should never be entered or approached without proper protection.